Revenge with Alara. My life, my choice. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 59 years old, a widow, living in a quiet neighborhood in Oregon. I've worked as an office manager at a law firm for almost 20 years. I raised two children, my daughter Emily, who just turned 32, and my son Luke, who is 29. I spent most of my adult life making sure they never struggled the way I once did. Last Tuesday, I received an email that quietly changed everything. It came from Emily. No subject line, just her name sitting in my inbox. I smiled before opening it, thinking it might be a quick update or a warm note before her big day. We had spoken about her wedding plans only weeks earlier. I had already given $30,000 to help her secure the venue, book the photographer, and reserve the florist she had loved since college. But when I opened the email, that smile disappeared. Mom. That was how it began. Not dear Mom. Just Mom, flat and distant like a label. Emily explained that she, along with her fiancé Andrew and his family, had finalized the guest list for the ceremony in Napa Valley. After thinking it through, they decided it would be best if I watched the wedding through a live stream instead of being there in person. She added that Andrew's mother was very particular about the number of guests and wanted to keep everything small. At the end, she wrote a line that felt sharp and careless. If I still wanted to be part of it, I could watch through the Google Meet link they had created. It should feel just like being there. LOL. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My coffee went cold. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. Something inside me shifted quietly, like the ground cracking open while I remained standing. I replied with only 4 words. Sure. Enjoy your big day. No anger. No argument. Just a quiet step back. Deep down, I knew those 4 words would echo louder than any scream. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want tears. I wanted clarity. I wanted silence to say what I couldn't. I closed my laptop, finished my cold coffee, and got ready for work like it was any other Tuesday. But it wasn't. That was the day I stopped pretending my sacrifices still mattered to my daughter. That was the day everything truly began to change. The drive to the office that morning felt longer than usual. Oregon's early spring air still carried a soft chill, but I barely noticed it. My thoughts kept looping around the same quiet question. How did we end up here? I had spent 18 years working at Caldwell Walker Law. It wasn't impressive work, but it was steady. And after my husband passed away suddenly, steady was the only thing that mattered. The kids were still teenagers then. I remember standing in front of our old washing machine, bills spread across the counter, trying to choose between groceries and Emily's college deposit. I never hesitated. I just made it work. I gave up weekends without complaint. I picked up extra shifts. I canceled vacations and missed birthdays. I kept telling myself there would be time for me later. There never was. Every dollar I saved went to Emily and Luke. When Emily changed her major twice and needed extra credits, I paid. When she moved across the country for a short job in New York, I covered the deposit and the plane ticket. When she cried through her second breakup at 27, I flew out, held her hand, and made her tea in a kitchen that didn't feel like home. When Luke wanted to buy a house with his fiancée, I co-signed the mortgage and wrote the first $10,000 check without blinking. I never kept count. That's what mothers do. Or so I thought. But that email made me feel like a transaction. Like I had been useful, and now I wasn't. Like I had an expiration date, and it had quietly passed. At the office, my boss Robert stopped by my desk. He was the kind of man who remembered birthdays and how you liked your coffee. He placed a latte from the cafe downstairs in front of me and said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to say my daughter had just erased me from her wedding. Instead, I smiled and said I hadn't slept well. He didn't push. That small kindness almost broke me. It reminded me I still existed, that I still mattered, even if only in small ways. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. Emily's name lit up the screen. Then again. And again. Voicemails. Texts. Mom, answer. We need to talk. This isn't funny. I didn't listen to any of them. I sat there sipping my latte, thinking maybe it was time to stop being the one who always answered. Maybe it was time to stop playing a role in someone else's story when they wouldn't even let me on the stage. That afternoon, I made a decision that felt calm but final. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to do something far more powerful. I was going to act. After work, I didn't drive home. I turned toward First Federal Bank a few blocks away. Carlos, the branch manager, greeted me by name as always. I sat across from him, my voice steady. I told him I needed to cancel a wire transfer, the one to the Napa venue. He hesitated, warned me about possible fees, then told me it hadn't gone through yet. Just in time. When he asked if I was sure, I nodded. I was sure. That transfer was $50,000, on top of the $30,000 I had already given. $80,000 for a wedding I wasn't allowed to attend. I signed the papers and walked out without looking back. By the time I got home, there were missed calls from Emily and Luke. One voicemail said, "Mom, please don't do this." I turned my phone off. That night, sitting on my porch with a glass of wine, I felt something unfamiliar settle in. Not anger, not regret, just a deep, quiet stillness. That night, just after 9, the doorbell rang. I thought about ignoring it. I had already decided I was done explaining myself. But curiosity won. When I opened the door, Luke was standing there in his work clothes, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He looked tense, holding his phone like it was armor. "Mom," he said, stepping inside before I could answer. "Why aren't you picking up?" "Emily's losing it." I closed the door calmly. "Hello to you too." He started pacing almost immediately. "She says you're not coming to the wedding now. That you're being difficult." I let out a short laugh. Difficult? For not attending a wedding I was told not to come to. Luke shifted, uncomfortable. "Andrew's parents are paying for most of it. You know how traditional they are." "Traditional," I repeated. "I already paid $30,000. I was about to send 50 more. That isn't tradition. That's something else." He stopped moving. "Wait. You were sending another 50? I said, taking a sip of wine. "Not anymore." The color drained from his face. "Mom, they're counting on that money. The venue, the food. Not my problem," I said quietly. His voice rose. "Of course it is. She's your daughter." "And I'm her mother," I replied, steady and calm. A mother who was told to stay home and watch through a screen. Luke ran his hands through his hair, clearly frustrated. "You always make everything about yourself." That was the moment something inside me finally gave way. "Get out of my house." He stared at me. "What?" "You heard me. Get out." "Mom, no," I said, firm but soft. "I've given everything I had. I'm done being the villain in a story I wrote with love." He stood there for a few seconds longer, then turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. It wasn't loud, but it felt final. I stood alone in the living room, my heart racing, waiting for guilt to hit. It didn't. What I felt instead was freedom. The next morning, my phone lit up again. Dozens of missed calls. Messages from Emily, one after another. They started sharp and blaming. "Why are you doing this? This is childish." Then the tone shifted. Panic crept in. The venue hadn't been paid. The deposit was at risk. Andrew's parents were furious. She said they believed this proved everything they'd ever thought about me. At 3:24 in the morning, one final message came through. "I don't understand why you're doing this to me." I stared at it while my coffee cooled. Of course, she didn't understand. She had grown up wrapped in my sacrifices so tightly that she never questioned where the comfort came from. She assumed I would always be there, that I would always fix things. But not this time. Later that morning, while I was reviewing contracts at my desk, an email appeared in my personal inbox. The subject line read, "Please don't ruin my wedding." I opened it without any real expectation. Emily wrote that she knew I was upset about the live stream situation, but what I had done was extreme. They had already lost the venue deposit. If the remaining balance wasn't paid by the end of the day, the caterer would walk. Andrew's parents were furious. She said they believed this proved I couldn't be reasoned with. Then she wrote the part that settled everything. She said we could talk about me attending the ceremony, but they needed the funds first. I read that line twice. Not an apology. Not even a pause to consider my feelings. Just a negotiation. As if my place at my own daughter's wedding was something that could be bargained for, bought back with money. I didn't respond. I closed the email and went back to my work. Around noon, Robert stopped by my desk and asked if I wanted to get lunch. There was a new Italian place that had just opened. Normally, I would have said no. I always did. But something in me had shifted. Maybe it was the clarity of the last day. Maybe I was simply tired of disappearing for everyone else. I nodded and said yes. Over pasta, he talked about his grandchildren, how exhausting and beautiful it was to keep up with them. Then he paused and looked at me. He said I seemed lighter. I surprised myself by telling him everything. The email, the wedding, the money, the decision. When I finished, he didn't judge me or try to fix it. He just said that sometimes the hardest part of love is setting boundaries, especially with the people we give the most to. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He said he thought I had done the right thing. For the first time in a long while, I believed it too. That evening, as I pulled into my driveway, the sky was already dim. The porch light clicked on by itself. Everything looked calm, almost peaceful. But someone was sitting on my front steps. As I got closer, I recognized her. Sophia, Emily's best friend since childhood. She stood up quickly when she saw me, brushing imaginary dust from her coat. She said she was sorry to come by like this. I let her inside and offered her tea. As she looked around my kitchen, I could tell the memories were still there for her. Sleepovers, cookies, laughter that used to fill these walls. I finally asked if Emily had sent her. Sophia hesitated, then said Emily was a mess. The venue was gone. The florist had backed out. Andrew's parents were threatening to cancel everything. She said Emily knew she had messed up but didn't know how to fix it. I asked if that was why she was here. To fix it. She shook her head. She said she just wanted to know if there was anything Emily could say or do to change my mind. I paused. I thought about what it felt like to be excluded, to be treated like a bank account, to be welcome only when money was involved. I looked at Sophia, still hopeful, still young. No, I said quietly. There isn't. Her shoulders dropped. She asked if that was true even if Emily apologized. I handed her a mug of tea and told her that words come easily when people are desperate. But the people who truly love you don't wait until you walk away to notice you. Sophia nodded slowly. She said she understood, even if Emily didn't. She apologized again. I told her she didn't need to. We stood there in silence, two women from different generations sharing the same hard truth. Sometimes love has limits. She didn't stay long. She hugged me gently and left. When the door closed behind her, I realized I had finally shut the door on a version of myself I had outgrown. The wedding never happened the way they planned it. Without the money I had once promised, everything started to fall apart. They tried to find another venue, but nothing was available or it was far too expensive without my support. According to Luke, they eventually settled for a small backyard ceremony weeks later. A few relatives. Andrew's parents. I wasn't invited. And this time I didn't need to be. In the weeks that followed, Emily sent one more email. It was long and emotional, part apology and part explanation. I read it once, then archived it. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply finished. There is a strange kind of peace that comes with letting go, not in anger, but in clarity. For the first time in decades, I woke up without wondering who would need something from me that day. I no longer braced myself for guilt disguised as love. I made a new rule for myself. If my presence is negotiable, then so is my effort. I go to work. I read novels. I joined a pottery class. I have dinners with friends who see me, not what I can give them. Slowly, I started to recognize myself again, not just as a mother or a widow, but as a woman. I learned something I wish I had understood sooner. You don't have to burn yourself to keep others warm. Sometimes the strongest choice you can make is choosing yourself, quietly, without drama, and without regret. And in that quiet, I finally found my peace. Weeks turned into months. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. The quiet wasn't empty. It was deliberate, chosen. No more emails demanding explanations. No frantic calls at midnight. I realized how much of myself I had given away, piece by piece, like a puzzle that was never really mine. And now, the edges of my life finally fit together again. One Friday evening, I walked through the local farmer's market. The air was crisp, scented with pine and fresh bread. Families bustled past, laughter spilling from a street musician's guitar. I smiled at a little girl chasing a puppy. I felt nothing but warmth, not the old ache of longing or expectation. This was mine. At home, I started keeping a journal again. Not for anyone else, not even for posterity. Just for me. I wrote about the mornings I spent on the porch, the quiet victories of saying no, the small joys that had once seemed insignificant. Each word was a reclamation, a quiet affirmation that I was still here, still present, still unbroken. Then one day, out of the blue, Emily called. I let it ring. And ring. I didn't pick up. Later, she sent a message. Can we talk? I read it, felt the familiar pull of connection, and did nothing. I realized that reconciliation, if it ever came, would have to start on my terms, not hers. And slowly, life began to bloom again. I traveled to the coast alone, sat by the waves, and let the ocean remind me how vast and patient the world could be. I laughed at things I hadn't in years. I poured myself coffee in my favorite mug and didn't feel guilty for savoring it. I learned that freedom isn't loud. It's quiet. It's steady. It's knowing you no longer owe pieces of yourself to anyone who would discard them. Sometimes, late at night, I sip my wine and watch the stars. The sky is vast and patient, reminding me that quiet strength outlasts all noise. And in that stillness, I smile, because I have finally learned the most important truth. I am enough. And that alone is enough.